Hi, my name is Avery, and for this assignment, I went through the white racial identity model, and I read through each stage and I tried to kind of think of how old I was when I experienced each stage. And it was actually kind of hard for me to break it down and figure out, where I was in my life during each of those stages and even where I am now. But I could think of some experiences from as young as 5 years old when my race became apparent to me. One example of that is when I was 5 years old, I joined like a basketball team, and I was actually one of only I think like two or three white girls on the team, and I remember like as a little kid just being kind of unsure of like how to interact with these other girls because quite frankly I just had never been around many people of color at that point in my life. And I know looking back on it now, just being unsure in that situation definitely shows some internalized racism that, of course, as a 5 year old, I didn't know that I had. And I would say probably it was my last year or two of high school and into college when I really started to confront my own internalized racism and any, thoughts or tendencies I had that could be viewed as racist. And it's definitely something that I still consciously work on today. And so I personally have never experienced institutionalized racism, but I have been present to see it happen. I could think of an example when I was in college. Two of my closest friends at that time were black males, and we often hung out in their dorm. And it was a pretty mixed group of us. So, there were some of us were white, some of us were black. There's a couple Hispanic people as well. And anytime that we hung out there, they had a neighbor who was white who would always smoke marijuana. And without fail, every time that we smelled that smell of marijuana, the RAs would come knocking on my friend's, door, thinking it was them. And even though it happened multiple times just when I was there, let alone probably happened when I wasn't there as well, the RAs who were white continually kept thinking like, oh, it must be, this specific dorm room, which happened to be the room of the two black males. And so, rightfully so, my friends were really bothered by this assumption that they would be the ones breaking the rules. And this is kind of just a smaller example of institutionalized racism, and it's one that luckily it ended well. Every time that it happened, it was just the RAs that came to the room. It was never like campus police or anything that ended in a more serious way. But of course, they were just really upset by the whole thing, and I definitely feel like I do have a privilege just because of the color of my skin. It definitely protects me from having any of these experiences personally. Looking back on my life, like I said, I've never experienced that kind of racism, potentially any racism, and so I think that's really important to be aware of. And when this event happened, I was in the intimacy versus isolation stage of development. I think being in this stage of development could have had a variety of impact on me and everyone else involved in the situation. For me, I learned that it was important to keep your friends close to you. We really tried to stand up for our friends when we were there, when that situation happened. And it also kind of gave me like a distrust of, authority figures because the RAs were, in kind of a level of authority over us. And they continued to make that same mistake and that same incorrect assumption. And for my black friends who experienced the racism, I definitely think they felt unsure of the relationships around them as a whole, you know, not sure if we would keep coming back and sticking around as their friends if they were continually being blamed or accused of wrongdoing. And I'm sure that they also felt, you know, that similar distrust of authority. And so a way that I could personally challenge the power structures that perpetuate racial inequality is by acknowledging the struggles and disadvantages created by racism for Black people and people of color. This means not just succumbing to racial blindness and saying, yeah, everyone's equal, like let's treat everyone that way, but actually recognizing how each race is different and unique, and also what unique needs have come about for them because of institutionalized racism. For example, Elias and Paredes discuss in their article the costs of institutional racism and its ethical implications for healthcare. They discuss that racism itself has caused inequality within the healthcare system for people of color and especially for Black people in our country. If we simply move on from racism and just say, oh yeah, like, you know, race doesn't matter, we don't need to talk about it, we don't address those disparities that now exist. So instead of doing that, we need to actually identify those disparities and actively work to eliminate them and create a system that eventually could hopefully be considered equal. But yeah, so just, you know, taking that action to be not just not racist, but anti-racist, and just really acknowledging the struggles that people of color have faced because of racism and doing what I can to help try and eliminate those disparities.